This is true. I was witness to it all, after a fashion. I was there, or was told things if I was not there to see for myself. That other stories could be told, I have no doubt, but this is the one that strikes as the one to tell now, with the desk before me, the books about me, and outside the cloudless skies and the inexorable sun, like Ixion, beginning his round again. Still. She'll have my balls, for Christ's sake. That day was very much like today. The same cloudless skies, the same sighing of the flora steeling themselves against the heat of the day, which had not yet arrived, but which was inevitable. As to a month, I could make a stab, but they tend to blur into the same heat haze these days, so I'd be hard pushed to tell. Although it wasn't December. That I do know. For he always left the country in December to get in a bit of skiing and escape Christmas. That still leaves the field quite open. Where was I? I was pootling in the house, or what I say was a house, although some might disagree, possibly rummaging in a cupboard to find something to tempt me into eating. He had a habit of coming upon me when I least expected him, and when I did expect him, he never arrived. It's fortunate, then, that I had given up masturbating for good, for that would have been a spectacle neither of us would have enjoyed greatly. So I didn't much mind when he came, for I was always going to be innocently doing whatever it was I did from moment to moment. I minded that he came, in truth, but given that he was bound to come, I didn't mind when. Yes, I was in the kitchen. He pushed past me to reach a whiskey bottle on the counter. I always have whiskey in the house, not for myself, but for him, who couldn't seem to be too far removed from the stuff, so he makes sure I have a bottle in, waiting for one of his visits. He whipped off the screw top and then glared at me. My fucking balls. On a plate. Can I get you anything? Like what? Say what you mean for once in your life. Frankly, this piece of advice is one I would normally ignore. The dangers of saying what you mean are legion, in my opinion. It seemed innocent enough, though, but where would it all end? That is what troubled me. Where would it all end, in the end? A drinking glass for your whiskey? Look at me, he said. I looked at him. What do you see? This time I thought it better not to say what I meant. For if I was to answer truthfully, I would have said an overweight, slack-jawed, shaven-headed man of an uncertain age, who was turning a very alarming shade of puce. So I said nothing. His age was uncertain because I did not know what it was. Whilst I had been alive, he had always been there, or thereabouts, and always seemed to be the same age. He could have been 50. He could have been 70. For there are men of advanced years who can still make a fist, physically speaking, of vigour. Undoubtedly, I was the younger, but by how much I couldn't say, save for a generation or thereabouts. Maybe I will come to look more like him as I grow older. Or do all men grow old in their own special way? Time will tell. If I make it to old age, of course. You see me standing before you with my balls at stake and an open bottle of whiskey in my hand. Of course I want a fucking glass. I gave him same. He poured from a great height and freely. Drops of whiskey flew, staining the already stained formica. I averted my eyes whilst he drank. The noises were enough to tell me that the vision of him drinking would not have been a pleasant one. Adam's apple bobbing, whiskey slipping from the corner of his mouth, the wipe of the back of the hand across his lips. When I heard a final theatrical gasp, I knew it was safe to look at him again. Although I was more tempted to look at the drying of the drops of whiskey on the counter, for the new stains had brought into relief other, older stains, as if I was seeing them anew, although now I couldn't name them. True, many of the stains had been there when I moved in, but some were of my own making and amounted to a little record of me in my little kitchen, which may have been more of a kitchenette. Nevertheless, I did look at him and fix my face and attention. "She?" I asked. "That bony old bitch of a whore," he barked, muzzling into the glass again. "Ah," I said. "Ah," he said, but not in the same way. It was another theatrical post-drinking gasp. "You haven't got the first idea who I'm talking about, have you?" "No." And I meant it. Cass fucking Andra. Parents do such awful things to their children. Everyone called her Cass. He called her everything under the sun apart from Cass, which I suppose was his prerogative. He poured himself another whiskey and barged past into the other room where my sole armchair sat. He sat on it and humphed. I hovered behind and saw once more the reason for the shaving of the head. A large area of hair-free pate. If he'd not shaved his head, he would have looked like a monk. Well, his hair would have looked like a monk's hair. The rest of him was far from being suitable to take the tonsure. "Do you know what she said to me? Where the fuck are you?" "She said that to you?" "No, you. Where are you?" "Behind you." "You won't understand a word unless you look me in the face. Behind me. Get around here." I got around there and faced him. There was nowhere else to sit save the floor, so I stood. So at least we were not face to face, but I saw his face well enough for him anyway. "Now, let's start again." "Let's start at the very beginning," I said, hopefully helpfully. "We will start from where I left off. I'm not the sort of man who has the time to go around repeating himself. You won't get me beating around the bush either. If I've got something to say, and I have, oh, you better believe I've got something to say. If you think I've got nothing to say, then you're making a serious mistake." He took another gulp and sat there in silence. I didn't like his silences. They invaded my own too much. If I didn't know that he was not a man capable of reverie, I would have said that he was in a reverie. "You were saying?" I said. He came back from wherever he had been. "Do you know what she said to me?" "Don't think I don't know. That's what she said." "Don't think I don't know." "Exactly. To me." "Don't think I don't know what?" "That's what I said." "And what did she say?" "Never you mind." "Sorry." "No." "She said never you mind, fuckwit, and flounced off." "She called you a fuckwit?" "No, fuckwit. I called you a fuckwit." "I wasn't there." "Now, right here, right now, I called you a fuckwit. Is that clear now?" "As the purest stream." "What?" "Sorry." I don't think I was helping his complexion. He had begun puce and was now a rash of competing colours, albeit all within the pink to purple spectrum. They swarmed all over his face. "I can't think with you standing there over me," and he aimed a kick in my direction. His pudgy legs were not long enough to reach me. "Get over there," he said, and gestured with his glass to a corner. I looked at the corner, and it seemed as good a place to stand as any, if I was going to have to stand, and it seemed as if I was. So I shuffled over. It was true. Once I was safely out of the way, the words came more easily to him, although at the greater risk of my not understanding. For I find that when you really want to understand someone, then it's best to fix your attention squarely on the face and watch the lips go through their motions. Corners, though, are fine places to be, if properly jammed in, and especially if the corner is a true 90 degrees or thereabouts. For then you're effectively covered on three sides and you can channel all the necessary concentration in one direction, not having to worry about what is going on behind you or to your left or to your right. My bed, which is more of a cot perhaps, is jammed into a corner in much the same way, but with a different aim. For when I'm sleeping, I'm not concentrating on anything, save for the revelries in my own head. But I still like to feel that I'm not entirely open and vulnerable, and that the hazard of rolling out of the bed and crashing onto the floor in the throes of a nightmare is diminished by a full 50%, if my maths is correct. "So there you have it," he said. There was a pause of some duration. "You haven't been listening, have you?" "No." He tried to get to his feet and managed on the second attempt. He walked as he talked, heavily. "Me shagging around. Me think Cassandra knows. Me need to know if Cassandra knows. You fucking well find out." To give him his due, his timing was exquisite. For he'd accurately measured the distance from his chair to my corner, precisely calculated the distance of each step, and paced his words accordingly in order to grasp me by the throat at the very same moment as he spat out the expletive. It really was a very fine example of mind and body working in utter harmony. The whiskey on his breath was not as unpleasant as one might imagine. It had almost a sweet tinge to it. And I noticed too that his latest dental work had been a roaring success. He let me go and ordered me to get another drink. The kitchen was still heavy with his presence, but this did not deflect me from the growing realization of what he'd said to me. How, I wondered, was I to find out if she had found out, presumably without my letting slip that I was working on his behalf? Surely it would be forbidden to simply go up to Cassandra, assuming I was capable of such a thing, and saying in the simplest language, "Do you know that your husband is shagging around?" I wouldn't use the word shagging, of course. Cass is not the sort of lady to whom one can say shagging. Could one even talk of shagging with her at all? By which I think I meant, can one talk to her of matters of a sexual nature, and not can one talk of having sexual relations with her? That would be unimaginable to say. No, I had the feeling, although he hadn't stated it, that the whole thing would have to be done stealthily. Which begged the obvious question. If stealth, delicacy and discretion were demanded, why had he commissioned me? Discretion I could manage because I talked to no one. But delicacy? Stealth? Once, perhaps, when I had more practice rubbing up against the rest of humanity, but I was, I feared, rusty. Now, I can use stealth to avoid people, of course. But that is far from being the same thing as using stealth with people. I was quite sure of that, even at the dawning of the affair, to which I felt the need to further consider that whilst his final instructions had been clear, they were not complete. For in order to know if Cass knew, I would have to know precisely what it was he feared she knew. I would have to know with whom he was shagging, to at least have a target for any subtle searches I might undertake. But I didn't want to know whom he was shagging. I was having a hard enough time accommodating myself to the fact that he was shagging at all, and that in order to fulfill my brief, I might run the risk of forming a complete mental picture of said shagging was enough to shudder me. like someone walking over my grave, as they say, although I'm not dead. That I managed all this in the time it took to pour a whiskey demonstrates the state of my mental capacities at the time. Inevitably, this now makes me think that I thought nothing of the sort at that time. But I must have thought something. For on my return, and once I'd handed him his whiskey and reoccupied the corner, I ventured the following. Who? You would have thought I was a teenager sometimes, the way my voice wobbled and ran the gamut of the octaves open to me. It must have been my intonation, I can't see what else it could have been, that made him make to leap from his seat and attack me once again, only to then think better of it. Unless it was the question itself, which I feared might be impertinent at best. Yet sometimes questions have to be asked, even when you'd much rather not know the answer, as was the case on this occasion. I didn't pry into my own sex life, even when I had one. And I was not keen to pry into the sex lives of others in general, and his in particular. Some people should not be allowed to have sex at all. There, I've said it. There should be a permit, or a license, like having a dog. I coughed to gain tighter control of my vocal cords and launched again. Of course, I said, you don't have to answer. If I were you, I wouldn't. But then if you were I, then you wouldn't ask me anyway, for the question wouldn't come up. I was rather aware of my use of the word come, but couldn't think of an alternative, save arise, which in the circumstance would hardly have been any better and may have been worse. I rallied and soldiered on, bravely, I think. With whom? I left it dangling, not wanting to end. He left it dangling, staring at me the while. I wish I could describe the succession of looks that passed over his face whilst the question hovered, but I can't. Yet I will say his face finally settled for a glaring resolve. A hiatus of some seconds occurred until I realised I would have to finish my question. So I coughed once more, hoping to gain further control of my voice, but instead dislodged a nugget of phlegm from the back of my throat, which I couldn't dispose of as I would have liked. Phlegm strikes at the most inconvenient moments, which is why you have to be phlegmatic about it. Better out than in is my motto, and I'm sore provoked when I can't stick to it. To swallow phlegm seems to me an opportunity missed. But there was no choice, so swallow it I did and felt it slip back down the gullet, like an oyster. Although I've never had an oyster. My own face was impassive throughout, I hope. With whom are you involved? Horribly vague, I know, but there you go. Involved. I detected a sneer. But I may have been wrong. Even at his gentleness, there was always the hint of a sneer lurking. Perhaps that was reserved only for me and his wife, obviously. Why can't you use the Queen's fucking English like the rest of humanity? Fucking involved. He rose. That is inaccurate. He lumbered out of the chair to then nonchalantly stroll across the room to look out the window. Although to call it a window is perhaps an exaggeration. So I'll call it rather a gap let into the stone, albeit properly glazed. So maybe more of a window after all. He dangled his glass between thumb and forefinger as if he hardly knew it was there. Ah, but I knew that he knew it was there. Of that you can be sure. Not that it's any of your business. Your roses need pruning. But the current shag is a girl called Violet. Amazing arse. Violet? What kind of fuck calls their kid Violet, eh? He leered at me. Perhaps they were fond of the flowers, I ventured. What if they were, eh? What if they were? Cassandra likes geraniums, but you don't see any slags around called geranium, do you? Roses. Well, of course you get roses. I thought Cass liked roses. You thought Cass liked roses? I was sure Cass liked roses. Cass likes roses, Cass likes roses. And he affected a little mincing dance and whining voice, which I thought a tad eccentric. Surprisingly nimble when he wanted to be, and as he gambled away, there was a smidgen of the child he must have been, teasing the less fortunate child in the schoolyard, the one with the limp, or the hunch, or the lazy eye, mercilessly. He stopped. Who gives a fuck what she likes? It's what she knows that is important. Do you understand that? I understand that. Nor was this an overstatement. For I now had a clear enough picture in my head, where else it could have been, I don't know, of what was at issue. What did Cass know of Violet? There it was, in a nutshell. Thanks very much.